Hello and welcome back to the final part of our series about kids and money. Today we'll be discussing young adults and what comes after high school. In our first two videos, we discussed allowance, teaching children about money and budgeting, first cars, first jobs, and much more. If you missed our first two videos and are interested in watching, you can find those on our YouTube channel or on our website, www.windwardfp.com. I'm Brandy Ward, a wealth manager for Windward, and back with me today are Daryl Tierney, a certified public accountant and certified financial planner, as well as Drew Osborne, a certified financial planner. Well, all the talk of teaching financial literacy really comes to a head as children become young adults. This young child is Drew Osborne, his senior year of high school. Within months of graduating, kids are tasked with making huge financial decisions regarding college loans, credit card offers, and entering the workforce. There's many topics to cover today, and I'm excited to talk about them. I'll start with Daryl. When it comes to young adults' big financial decisions, what role should we play as parents?
Man, that is a really good question. And I think the way I would answer that is I think it's going to depend a lot on the kid. So if you've got what you consider a very responsible young adult, you might back off a little bit and let them make some bigger mistakes. If they're not financially responsible, it's probably a good thing to keep a pretty darn tight leash on it. The thing I always wonder is, it's a challenge. You get a kid who, well-intentioned, may be going headlong into student loan debt going into an area that you feel like potentially could be a mistake. What happens? Do mom and dad intervene? There's a lot of that, and a lot of coaching. So, I really think it just comes down to the kid, but I think you just can't lose sight that the goal is you want them to be financially independent by the time they're done. And so everything should be directed towards that goal of independence.
Yeah, one thing I always think about is, are these decisions things that will really affect them in the long term, or is it something that a big impact can be learned by a relatively small mistake? The best example I have of that is when I was a freshman in college, the credit card offers came, and I've always heard the best way to get your credit up is to get a credit card. So naturally, I got a student Discover card with a $300 credit limit, and I maxed that thing out quickly. I love to shop, and I maxed it out. Well, I was working at a grocery store making like $6 an hour back then, only 3 days a week, and I was a nervous wreck about how I was ever going to pay off this huge credit card liability I had. And I worked hard to pay it off because, I mean, $300 is a lot when you're not, when you're not making a lot of money. And in hindsight, I realized that, $300 is $300, but it's not the worst thing that could have ever happened to me, but it taught me a super valuable lesson that, one, I can't handle credit cards. So I don't have them now. And it taught me a huge lesson without a $12,000 credit card limit where I could have really hurt myself in the long term.
Well, the truth is we don't learn that much from our successes, and we learn a lot from our mistakes. And so I think that's just a really good attitude to go into it with, is there's going to be mistakes, and $300 mistakes, you can recover from that. But there can be some big ones you can't recover from.
And I think you're right, Daryl, that just in general, in saying that, the hard part is there's not a perfect formula, because every child is unique and different. Every parent is unique and different. Okay, yeah. Before I make my point, I don't really necessarily want to defend myself, but so why in high school did we think it was a good idea for us to like, not have hair? It was like,
Yeah, that's a good look on you.
I don't think so. And the goal is to keep my hair as long as possible. So, hey, financial mistakes help us learn. Hair mistakes help us learn that I should not have my hair be that short. Um, but my point was kind of going back to this idea. Oh man, we say all the time with our kids who, are just approaching teen years. That each kid is different, and some of the kids, when they make a mistake, it is devastating to them. They just feel the weight of that so big. And I feel the weight of my own mistakes so big. And the mantra so often for us is mistakes help us learn. Mistakes help us learn. And now I'm using that mantra for myself as a parent, that when they make mistakes, it helps me learn and them learn. And I think maybe you even referenced it at one of our prior webinars, is that when do you want to see them work through it while they're still with you, or when they're maxing out credit cards at college?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, you want to get them off the launching pad, and that's a process, and every kid's going to be at a different point in the process when they go away. So whether it's and there's so many, it's just such a turning point. I do think where you've got two parent households, it's really good that everybody's on the same page, because I think everybody kind of comes in with different experiences on that. And some people, I know this from just discussions with clients. Some people feel like a college education, the thing is what you want to do is learn to learn, and they're big on like a liberal arts education that I want to teach my kid to think. They don't look at it as a direct job training kind of a situation. It's I want my kid to learn how to learn. So if they have a philosophy degree, fantastic. Other families look at that as, hey, I want my kid with a nursing degree or an accounting degree. I want a job the day they step out. I think it's really good that mom and dad kind of get on the same page on that, and so that they can kind of help guide the child. But very difficult, because you're trying to set your kid up, for a lifetime of success, and it's a first step. But I think that the one thing to remember is it is a first step, and in today's world, there's a lot of career changing and things like that. So you can kind of give yourself a break and say, hey, a few people, whatever they're doing in college, they do the rest of their lives. But not everybody, and there's a lot of, so that's okay. It's okay to have some flexibility.
I'm
Yeah,
already saying that as my kids tell me what they want to be. It's hard for me.
Well, hey, I was gonna go into ag science and learn about like proper nutrition for cattle. So I'm a long ways from that when I started out thinking about college. And so I think changing your mind is definitely just part of the process. The other thing I'll add is, I think we were all teenagers once. We don't always love listening to our parents when it comes to advice. So I read a book that my dad recommended to me, that I'll pass along. It's called The Millionaire Next Door, and it's just a good thing for maybe seniors in high school to read. It's an easy read, that can kind of convey some of the messages that I think as parents we want to convey, but our kids don't always love to hear. Daryl, I know you had another book you really liked.
Well, the one I like this actually would work high school or college, but The Richest Man in Babylon, I think, is a great book on saving and it really explains compounding. It's the best, book I've seen, and it doesn't feel like a financial book, so it's just kind of an old story, but it's a good one.
Well, and both of those are books that teach a message that they may not hear very often in very many other places. And I don't know. I feel like there are a lot. I think kids can get a bad rap and be like, oh, kids, I don't know if they'll actually read a book. Well, I know a lot of kids that like to read and that are hungry for something more than just the American consumeristic way, and so why would I not invite them into that? So,
well, and and Brandy mentioned that, hey, they might not listen to mom and dad, but they might listen to a book. One thought I have, and I think that's true. I mean, there's something in us genetically that when you get to that age, you want to start becoming independent, and
yeah.
so part of that independence is I'm not really listening to mom and dad. I was fortunate. I was an accounting major, which, went on to become a CPA and a CFP and all that. So I was kind of pretty steady on what I wanted. But I was fortunate enough that a young family friend who was working in those days for what was one of the big 8 accounting firms came to my house while I was home over Christmas break and just kind of told me a little bit about, what it was like to be in the accounting business, and said, hey, hang in there, study, this will pay off for you, blah, blah, blah. And, to this day, I don't know if my mom and dad arranged that or his employer said, you need to go out and start recruiting people or whatever, but it was a good thing. And I listened to him in a way I probably would not have listened to what my mom and dad said. So mom and dad, if you can work some magic behind the scenes, that is helpful.
Well, and I think that's a great place to interject here. We didn't even talk about this. If you are a client, we would love to be an advocate for your family in any way that we could. So if it would be a something we would love to do if you said, hey, could you grab coffee with my kid? Or, that would be so fun for us. And yeah,
I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, I agree. I was actually thinking that too. Well, all the talk of
boy.
college. Here's Daryl. The question every high school gets.
How is that not blown up at our office? That is unbelievable.
Wow. This was probably when I was trying to decide whether I wanted to be a sailor out of Key West or, become an accountant. What in the world?
Exactly. So the question every high school senior is asked most often, what are you going to do after you graduate? So let's talk about the question of whether it's college or something else. How do you help guide children to what's next?
That's a good one. Again, I'm gonna, sound like a broken record here, but I really think it does come down to the kid for sure. And what their interests are. We're a little late. A lot of the European countries, they're making some decisions really early with young kids on kind of what career paths are going to be and those kinds of things. And their secondary education really guides them that way. We don't really do it that way in the United States. The United States, you just kind of don't know. But whatever it is, if it's a kid going into a trade, I mean, college is not for everybody. College is I've always said college is a great place if you know what you want to do, or if you don't know what you want to do and you just want to kind of buy time, that may be a good place for you, but it's certainly not for everybody. And man, there are just so many great career paths. In fact, interestingly, there's a lot of the pretty what I would consider technical skills like computer sciences and things like that, where certifications are almost more important than getting a college education, you know. So it's just all over the board. And again, this is know your kid and really try to get them onto a path that makes sense.
Yeah, that's totally true. It's been interesting, Daryl, is my oldest is going into high school now, and then the next one into 8th grade. And it seems like, and I'm just seeing this as they go through it, that there is almost a little bit more flexibility in how they get to build their schedules. And that has been kind of interesting to help them just ask the question, like, yeah, what are you into? Do you want to take an extra art type thing, or do you want to do more different levels of math? And so that's interesting relative, like Europe versus America. But that has been one place where I have tried to key in to see how they're thinking. And what I was going to say, I'm glad you spoke first because I didn't have a lot to add. But to me, it is like, I feel like I want to have lots of little conversations with my kids where I'm asking them questions or I'm noticing things about them, of saying, wow, you're really interested in arguing with me a lot. You could make a great lawyer. Or, not that sarcastic necessarily, but really trying to pay attention and call things out in our kids. And so, that's just one piece. And there's no doubt that college isn't going to be the perfect track, and a lot of vocational school, like you said, can be super valuable. And it'll be really, I just saw an article that was basically saying, like, the more AI evolves, it'll be most interesting. But one pattern that may emerge is people who can actually help you physically do something may become more valuable over time than all of these just highly educated typical college programs. But I don't have a massive point to make other than that. But we still know the facts still hold to be true, is that there is a huge delineation in income over time with people who have college degrees than not. It doesn't mean it's the perfect path, but it can be a really, really important differentiator for a lot of folks.
Yeah,
I think, go ahead, Brandy.
I was just going to say, I agree. I think small, somewhat frequent conversations with kids when they're in high school is important, about things like the difference between a college degree and not, income-wise, over someone's lifetime. And then also pointing out their strengths. Not only could that help them pick a career path in the future, it's also a good confidence builder. I mean, in high school, to be told, you're really good at math, that's a great skill, is a good confidence builder as well. And just like you said, knowing your kid, letting them know if you don't think college is probably the path for them, because you can read that in them, encouraging them to do something else so that they don't feel super pressured to do that. And I know Missouri has what's called the A+ program. It's a scholarship program where high school kids work towards that. That's a good conversation point to encourage your kids to try for A+ and then talk about what they could do after high school with the scholarship.
Yeah, that's really good. And as you were saying that, the thing that made me think, you do, it's, you kind of want to catch your kid with those little moments and find out what they're passionate about. But depending on the kid, you may need to say, you really need to take this class. You're good at this. You need to do that. They may not have the initiative to want to take that math class, or you may have to say, yeah, I think this is, and try to make sure they're seeing, a lot of areas, and help them understand what they may like or may not. So, yeah, it's a challenge. I think of, frankly, I can remember my mom, used to say, the bigger the kids, the bigger the problem. The older they get, the harder it is. And it really is true. I find as we're talking about this, and we've done these programs for the little ones up through, middle school and high school and all that. This is there starts being a bigger range in terms of how the kids are operating. And so it's important as parents to fit in as best you can with the kid at where they are. And they're going to be all over the board within the same family at different ages. So.
One other point that I was just thinking about relative to college and the process is that there's like this process of how much do I let the kids into the window of like mom and I, our family finances or our plan for how to do college with them. Because up to this point with middle school students, we've said, hey, we're saving towards your college. And they have said, how much money is that? And I have just said, I'm not telling you because I don't think you can handle it. Just money doesn't make a lot of sense, all the way through to you. But as they're in high school now, I am wanting to be more concrete and more specific and, whatever, there's a lot of ways to do it. But when it's kind of the process of, okay, how do we do college? Where do we do college? We've seen some clients who have given their students, their kids, full flexibility of what that looks like. And they have basically come to us and said, yeah, our kid has said they're going to go to this, private art college where, we don't know that they'll get a good degree, but it's really what they want to do. And it partly they felt like it was partly their choice, but they kind of felt powerless to it. Like, oh no, we didn't set this thing up well and it's a little out of control and this ball has started rolling and now it is what it is. And it was just a reminder for me of, okay, how much control do we want to have while giving them as much flexibility as they can? And I'm realizing now is the time where we're going to start to let them into the process to be able to say, hey, look, in-state tuition is going to cost this much at these 4 different schools. And mom and I are willing to contribute X amount of dollars. And so this is what the end result could look like. If it took you 4 years, if it took you 5 years, it might look different. If you did it quicker than that, if you did A+, and we want to incentivize it so that they feel like they have some control over the process. And if they say, no, I want to go to the Art Institute or whatever, and say, okay, maybe we would say no, or this is how that could look. Nothing against art, by the way, but.
Yeah, and and we've said this in previous broadcasts, but this is certainly one of those areas where we have to say, hey, mom and dad, put your own oxygen mask on first if you're behind the curve in college. And man, the price, the ticket can go up really fast on this stuff. And if mom and dad are going to be on the hook, it's really important that you make sure you're on track for retirement, because you can derail your retirement. And people that are behind the curve are typically behind the curve on college funding and retirement at the same time. And if you're going to prioritize, our advice is probably going to be get retirement on track first, because there's a lot of ways you can fund college and retirement is very limited. If you're not on track for that, you got a problem. So.
Yeah. I also think thinking through scholarships, a lot of those scholarship applications happen in high school, and applying for scholarships depends on what career path you're going into. I applied for a lot of agriculture scholarships, what turned out did me no good since I switched to business. So that helps kind of guide the conversation. And it might bring up some of these questions about what are mom and dad funding here, what they've set aside, because a college or scholarship applications sometimes do ask that because they might give it somewhat based on financial need.
I've got a couple of just great in the trenches stories from clients, so it's funny. We talk about this where, I've had mom and dad who put themselves entirely through college, and the reaction sometimes is, that was the best thing that ever happened to me. I put myself, that's where I learned to be self-sufficient. Other ones say, I would never put my kid through what I went through doing that, and I get that. But two funny ones, it's just interesting to see how people approach it. I can remember one client that said, kids are going to have to pay all their, they're moving away for the first time if they're going, away from home to college. So they have to pay for freshman year themselves, because if they're going to blow it, that's where they're going to do it. So their money's on the hook for freshman year. They make it through that. I'll pay for sophomore through, until they graduate. That, and I thought, hey, that's fine. That's actually a great idea. And then another good one was, I had one mom and dad that said, hey, look, we'll reimburse you for your classes right after you have to front it. You pay for it. We pay 100% for A's, 90% for B's, 70% for C's, nothing for D's and F's, and you have to pay for it. It's just interesting. I mean, you see how people kind of approach it. So there's definitely some creative ways to go about it.
I think that's a good transition point. So we talked. This is me graduating high school. We talked a little bit about scholarships and maybe applying for those, and touched on student loans to help fund college. So we'll switch gears and talk a minute about funds already earmarked for post-secondary education. There's a lot of planning considerations about 529s, and working with a financial advisor like Windward can help you take advantage of the opportunities. One question I often hear clients asking is, how does the 529 affect the FAFSA? Drew, can you explain that a little?
Yeah, and you set it up well to say that, like most things in life, over time, all like 529 and college planning has gotten more involved, and it's gotten more complicated. And so there isn't a black and white formula of exactly how it should go in every situation. A, each situation is unique, and B, there are a lot of different things to consider. So working with an advisor, even once you have college funded, to help you think through the process of decumulating can be really, really, really valuable. So yeah, one really big picture point is that no matter what the expectation is of how college is going to be funded, it is almost always worth it for families to go through the process of going through filling out a FAFSA form, which is basically the federal form to help create a standard for how not just funding or grants will be, but also it becomes the avenue for any time anybody might take a student loan. And it has a specific window of time you need to do it in, and it needs to happen. So, I had basically just a couple often practices that aren't always every single time, but a couple things that stand out is that, the FAFSA, what it's trying to get to is to say, hey, how much should a family be expected to contribute as a family towards college or vocational school for a student? And they call that the expected family contribution. So the FAFSA helps build the formula for how much would be expected. So just to tell you how life gets more complicated, I opened up the PDF for how to calculate your expected family contribution. The PDF is 29 pages long. Life has gotten complicated. Everything has gotten so complicated. But as you would expect, families that have more resources would be expected to contribute more towards college. But even if you have a lot of resources, it's still valuable to fill out the FAFSA, because it may mean that you want or you need the student to have potentially some student loans, and all loans are not created equal. And so you want to make sure that you fill out the FAFSA to see if you can qualify for some potentially better loans that are backed by the federal government, rather than being forced into lesser loans or lesser programs. So a couple just big picture points. One, it's generally a good idea to use more of your 529 funds as a parent and as a family on your student in the earlier years. And then if you're going to come up short, then, and if you need to do loans, to do those in the later years. That's a general rule. It isn't always the case depending on situations. Another rule is you want to be able to coordinate federal tax credits, education tax credits, with how you're funding for college. Because the danger is, if you only use 529 funds, you technically wouldn't qualify for federal tax credits. And as a really simple example, some families, a lot of families, would be able to get $2,500 a year for 4 years of undergrad each year, so $10,000 of tax credits, if they paid $4,000 out of pocket each year. So out of pocket with cash or with student loans. If you use just 529s, you would not be eligible for that. So you might leave $10,000 on the table. You know, if you have multiple kids, that can add up. So there's just some planning in that regard and how to do that well. The other thing that I was just going to talk about relative to 529 planning is we have a lot of grandparents who say, hey, we want to help out. We want to help out some grandkids. And part of that expected family contribution is parent assets are treated different than the student assets. So sometimes a 529 plan is better than like a brokerage account for the student. And then often both of those have a lower contribution value than if grandparents have contributed money to the college. So the simple point is often grandparent funding is often most effective if it happens later in the student's career. So they say like January 1st of their junior year of college, anytime past that may have a smaller impact on their FAFSA, because FAFSA looks 2 years back. So by the time you're a junior, anything that the grandparents have done in those final years wouldn't show up on a FAFSA going forward. So those are a couple big picture things that stood out.
Those are good tips.
Yeah, so a couple other things I think about when it comes to 529 planning is if you have a 529 that you've invested since the kids were little, as your child approaches college age, you really want to take another look at how that's invested and make sure that its investment mix is still appropriate for the remaining time horizon. Maybe that's 4 years, or maybe you have way more money in there than you actually think little Susie's going to need. So maybe your time horizon isn't just 4 years, but I do think that's a good consideration. Daryl, do you want to talk about what it could look like, or what are options if a client doesn't need to use their whole 529 for a child's education?
Well, I mean, you know, really, you're getting at the heart of the flexibility of a 529 plan, because you know the 529 typically, you know, the student is named as the beneficiary. I mean, it can be the owner, but the owner and the beneficiary are typically two different people, and so with a separate beneficiary, the beneficiary can be changed so that it, you know, this money can be used for siblings, could be used for grandchildren, you know, children and grandchildren. I mean, so there's really a lot of flexibility. And, you know, mom and dad, if they funded the 529 plan, they can actually take the money back. There will be income tax consequences to that, but it's a rare animal, I think, in the estate planning world, where technically you've made a gift and the money's out of your estate, and it can actually come back in. You know, it's considered a completed gift, and then you can actually bring it back if the situation warrants. So that's one of the reasons that you know, 529s have become a very, very popular tool for college planning. Plus, it has high limits. in terms of how much you can put in, and it's not adversely affected by high income. So there's kind of there's an education IRA that's kind of a second cousin to this that has low limits of how much you can put in, and you get into some restrictions in terms of your income, whether you're even eligible to do them. So 529s have just kind of evolved to be the vehicle of choice.
I think it is mostly an excuse when people say, oh, but what if I have too much money at the end? I think it is an excuse for people not to actually save. I have yet to find a client who has regretted what they put into a 529 plan. I've had way more people say, geez, I wish I would have done more earlier. I haven't yet one said, boy, I did too much college savings. I just haven't had it happen. And so
Right.
The consequences aren't that bad. And there are totally some exceptions to the rule of if there are scholarships, some money can come out without penalties. There are exceptions, in the tragic events of death, there's so much flexibility.
Yeah, and the more mom and dad can get on the same page of what their intention is. So, our family, we had, our thought was, hey, we're going to provide the equivalent of 5 years in a public college education. We don't care where you go, but that's what you can expect from us. And we also made it kind of a lifetime thing. It's like, if you're not ready after high school, you want to wait 5 years, you still get that we're still on the hook for that. We'll cover that for you. But what you do, I don't think is nearly as important as being really clear about what you're trying to do. Especially so the kid knows, hey, we're trying to fund this to cover half your college, so you're on the hook for the other half, or whatever it may be. I think it's just good to set it out.
That's helpful for me just to hear you say that, Daryl, because I am kind of wrestling through, Lindsay and I are wrestling through specifically what we even want to commit to doing, because we also want to create some type of motivating factor for them, so that they can feel like they're owning part of the process too. And we don't exactly know what that's going to be, but it's partly like, how can we be creative if we're willing to pay for 4 years or 5 years of in-state tuition? How can I still motivate them to say, hey, look, if you get $10,000 of scholarships, at the end of that, we'll write you a $10,000 check, or I don't know what exactly it'll be, but
right. And this is the parenting part of it is, equal and fair aren't necessarily the same things, and so some parents, what they want to do is, I want to put exactly the same amount of money. That's what they consider is fair. Other ones say, hey, this kid got a full ride scholarship, so they don't need the help in that area. This one wants to start a business, and maybe that, so I think, as parents, you have to really kind of sort out, how do you want to help, and what's that look like, and what's fair. So
I will here.
That's I don't know what's worse, that one or the sailing picture.
I think the shorts are worse, but the picture's great.
My dad's pants, I kind of like those too,
Yeah.
That is literally
What is that?
the day. That was the morning I left as a freshman heading to K-State. So,
wow.
Yikes.
Is that smile excitement or terror?
It's probably terror. It's terror. Yeah, I think it's terror.
That's what it was for me.
Well, the final topic I thought we could talk about today are considerations for sending them off, just like Daryl's parents are doing for him here at as he goes off to K-State. So the first question on this topic is, what are some things parents should be thinking about as they send their children off to college?
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things that's really changed that we are big advocates of is making sure you've got actually the appropriate legal documents in place. So it's a good, you don't think about, doing estate planning for a kid, but it's a good idea. So, for example, healthcare power of attorney that allows you, if the child's 18, and depending on what your state law is, you may need that document in place to be able to make health choices for a child, and as well as a durable power of attorney for making legal decisions if they're not capable, and that's a important thing, because whether they act like it or not, they're going to be legally adults, and so you need to have the right things in place. I think even just the HIPAA disclosure, so that you can know about health issues, because you don't want to be in a position where your child is having health issues, they can't communicate, and you can't necessarily know what's going on. I mean, there's a lot of that. So that's a good, hopefully mom and dad have their estate plan in place. It's a really good time, I think, to check in with the estate planning attorney and say, is there anything we should be thinking about before they head away? I think that's just a really good idea.
Yeah, it's a different world. Go ahead, Brady.
Oh, I was also going to add, depending on the relationship you and your children have and how college is getting funded, once your kid goes away to college, most of the time as a parent, you can't see their grades. So
Yeah.
if that's something that you have made a stipulation of paying for school, you'll want to, there's forms at the universities that you can sign that allows parents to see their children's grades. So that is something you might want to consider as well.
One of the things we did with our kids, and this is maybe a commentary on the kind of cars they had, but we gave each of the kids a AAA card at that point, so that if they got stuck out on the highway or whatever, at least they had that was kind of the lifeline. So the AAA membership was one of our deals.
So in our last one, we talked about bank accounts while they're in growing up and even in high school. I'm curious what you all think in terms of how that changes. Brandy, what do you think for your kiddos? Will the credit card approach be different knowing your freshman year experience, or let them learn, or what?
Well, I will definitely discourage them from getting their own personal credit cards. But I think I would want to give them some type of, like, in the case of an emergency, have access to some way to pay for something, whether it be, I don't know, like an account we shared that they had a debit card on or something that they only got to use if they had a tire blow and needed to pay for it or something. But I would want access to it to be able to see it, so they weren't just running up a credit card like I was shopping. So I think that would kind of be my thought. Drew, Daryl, what do you guys think?
Well, kind of this goes back to a little bit of what we talked about with the high school kids. If you keep in mind that the ultimate goal is to get them to be financially independent, I think one of the easy thing to do is pay for, if there's a certain number of expenses that mom and dad are going to incur, that they're going to incur, the easy thing to do is just mom and dad to pay for them. My approach on that would be, I'd rather see you give, say, hey, rather than, hey, put your gasoline on this credit card and mom and I'll pay for this. My reaction would be more, no, let's give them an allowance and let them manage it. Learn to manage multiple things. I've seen parents where they're paying the rent, that whether it's a semester dorm fee or whatever it may be, and mom and dad just pay it. I think the better teaching way to do that is get the money in the kids' court and have them pay for it and let them manage it and juggle it. And because we all have all these competing things competing for our money, and that's just a great time. They're this close to being out, and so that's a really good way to cut into it.
Yeah, that's a good point. I remember my best friend, she she funded her own way through college. And so she got student loans that hit at the beginning of every semester, and she was rich in August and January, but she learned very quickly that she had to budget that out for the whole semester. And so whether that is funded through a student loan or by a parent funding it, it is definitely a teaching lesson to have to learn to budget it out over the course of months.
And I think like you, Brandy, the credit card sharks that are hovering around colleges and trying to get students by giving them a free towel or whatever, I think that's not so cool. But at some point, maybe, there's such thing as like a secured credit card, which is basically you have to put so much money onto it, and it basically serves as how you're paying it. That can sometimes be a better transition point than or being really clear about what the limit is and trying to put some strong encouragements or parameters around where it can go.
Yeah, and I think just talking to your kids in general about that is important, because not to throw my mom and dad under the bus, but they never mentioned that I would be getting all these credit card offers in the mail.
No,
And
right.
so I got it without ever even talking to them because I was an adult. So I think it's important just to talk to them about it.
Oh yeah, and I don't even know how to, I guess my credit card statements, I don't get it in the mail anymore, but I would love to show that just, little snippets a lot of times I think is a good way to teach kids. I feel like this is helpful for me to think, why don't I just click open the statement, have a kid come by me and be like, hey, look at this. This is what it shows the interest rate is if we only paid the minimum, and it would take this long to get it paid off. Can you believe that just for going to restaurants, it could take you 5 years to pay that off? I want to plant seeds that way while they're still under our household.
Yeah. Well, speaking of under our household, the last thing to talk about is, what if a kid doesn't go off right away? What are some things to think about if kids don't launch right out of high school? Daryl, do you have any thoughts or tips here?
Oh man, I think about one of my best friends, his family rule. I mean, they were hardcore. At 18, you were gone. You had, by your 18th birthday, you had to be out of the house. He joined the Army because he didn't know what else to do. He ended up becoming a doctor. He got the Army helped pay for that. But that's the extreme case. I think it depends a lot on what it is that they're doing. Again, this is one that's going to come down to the individual situation. If it's a maturity issue, they're just not ready. How much time do you take? Sometimes that's the problem. Sometimes it's not. So I know sometimes giving them financial incentives, for example, charging them rent. We've seen situations where, parents charge them rent and then give that money ultimately to the kid. Say, hey, look, we're going to start with a stepped up rent. It's going to start at 10% of what market value is, and it's going to go up and up and up until ultimately you're going to be paying us exactly what you'd be paying if you're out on your own. And by the way, we're going to keep that rent money and we're going to give it to you when you leave so that you can use it for rental deposits and utility deposits and things like that. So it's a challenge. It's a big challenge. And that may be a different scenario where maybe a child wants to live at home while going to school. And my lesson was, first kid went away to school, and I personally felt like one of the best learning experiences I had in my life was going away to school. I had one daughter who absolutely wanted no part of that. She wanted to live at home. She did fantastic in school, lived at home. It was a great thing. That was just her deal. And so, Dad learned that there's a lot of paths, and
Yeah.
So each kid's different.
No, that's so true. And it'll be fun to on the journey, with our own kids, what I've seen, one thing that I've noticed is it can be really difficult to have the status quo be here for a long period of time and then expect there to be an easy transition when it's a major transition. Meaning, we've had clients be like, oh gosh, they've been living here, they haven't been paying rent, it's been a couple years, everybody knows something can change, but the only change feels like it has to be dramatic, and that creates maybe more difficulty and issues. So it was almost like, gosh, how can we do little things frequently to adjust and change things? So I love, like, what made me think of it was your example of saying, hey, you pay 10% this year, 20% next year, or hey, the expectation is that you can live with us for college, but after year one, we're going to have you pay X amount for rent, or X amount for groceries. Or what I experienced with my family was in high school, we were expected to pay a third of car expenses. And then in college, we were expected to pay 2/3. And then after college, we would be responsible for all of it. And so that graduated level could happen in, I don't know, lots of different ways, but it helps.
Well, and if it's one of those maturity things that you just can't get them out of the house, then you start putting in kinds of rules like, and by the way, you have to sit down with mom and dad and have dinner every night. You have to do this and that. Make it uncomfortable enough for them that they're like, I got to get out of here.
Exactly. Yeah, I think, like you said, every situation's different. And I was doing some reading to get ready for this. And one of the big tips I read was, don't let your kids get too comfortable. Once they're adults, you can't still be doing their laundry for them every day and putting up their clothes. So even if they're still under your roof, giving them a lot more responsibility to take care of themselves that maybe they didn't have when they were younger. So maybe it is laundry, cooking for yourself, things like that. And then, like you said, less and less comfortable means, well, gosh, if I'm just as uncomfortable at home as I would be if I moved out, then maybe I'll move out.
Yeah, and I'm paying the same amount for rent that I would be if I was out, so I'm getting out of here.
Exactly. I remember my brother, he went away to college, and then after college, he moved back into my parents' basement. And I called my mom one day, and I was talking to her, and she was like, oh, I'm just putting away your brother's laundry. And I was like, you're doing what? And she was like, well, he's busy, so I was just doing his laundry and putting it away. So I always teased Nate. I'm like, well, no wonder you don't want to move out. I'm like, you get to hang out downstairs. You have your own TV and everything. You get to come and go as you please. And mom still does your laundry. So once I did that, my mom quit doing his laundry, and now he lives on his own.
See, siblings can help too.
That's right.
All right. Well, that is all we have for today. I hope you've enjoyed our 3-part series on kids and money and a few fun pictures along the way. We'd love to hear your feedback on how you thought, or how you liked this series. And if there's another topic you'd like us to talk about, please let us know and we might cover it in the future. If you have any questions about anything you heard today or how Windward can help you, please reach out. My email is on your screen. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.